Do you know Photoshop? If so, you may know neural filters. Now, if the term filter makes you stifle a yawn, I totally get it. Most of Photoshop's filters are very old. Think filter gallery, creaky effects like fresco, ink outlines, and everyone's favorite chrome. I mean, did you know Photoshop even offered a filter that lets you do this? Actually, that's kind of cool. But most of us wouldn't know if 70% of the filter menu dried up and blew away. Neural filters are a new breed. They don't compare neighboring pixels or distort images or even apply special effects. They take the image you're working on and compare it to an enormous database of images from 1,000 different sources and turn it into something slightly or completely different based on your instructions. A prime example is style transfer, which uses one image as a kind of instruction manual to rewrite another. One image is the style transmitter, the other is the style receiver. Want to know what I mean? Well, then let's get started. All right, so style transfer filter, we're focusing on the presets. I want to apply style transfer as an editable smart filter so that I can change my settings anytime I like. Problem is, this guy's a flat JPEG image. So best practice is to go to the layers panel, double click on the background to convert it to an independent layer, and name the layer as you make it. That way, Photoshop doesn't turn around and auto name it for you, layer 0 or something like that. Then click OK. Now I'll go to the filter menu and choose not the first command, because that's just going to repeat the last settings, but rather neural filters ... to bring up the neural filters workspace, which includes, among a lot of other things, this guy right here, style transfer. I'll go ahead and turn it on, and notice our presets. They include artist styles and image styles. Of the two, artist styles have more bells and whistles, but they're kind of hidden, and you don't always know what they are. So what you have to do is a lot of trial and error, frankly. You just got to try things out and see if they work. And so I'm going to scoot down the list a little bit here until I see this thumbnail. I'll go ahead and click on it. That, by the way, in case you're curious, is the painting Anxiety by Edvard Munch. It's from 1894. Anyway, it ends up producing an effect that looks nothing like that thumbnail. And that's because, like I said, there's all kinds of stuff going on. Dunno. We do have some controls, however. Quite a few controls, in fact, including strength. So if you think you want to see more of the Hulk in the background there, then go ahead and reduce the strength. This is not an opacity option. The next one is an opacity option. Rather, just controls how much of the effect you're applying. If you want a lot more effect, and it's going to come at the expense of the image, by the way, then increase the strength value and you'll get something that's far more abstract, which may be exactly what you want. If you want opacity, you have it. It's right here. So if I were to reduce this value to 50, then we're seeing 50% of the Hulk in the background and 50% of the stylized effect in front of it. I don't want that, so I'm just going to crank that value back up to 100. We're going to skip detail for now. I'll come back to it. It's really great. Very interesting option. Background blur is a bag of bricks. By which I mean I don't care for it. What it does, it might work better with a different image, but notice what we've done here by cranking that background blur value up to 100, which is the maximum. We've gone ahead and blurred what Photoshop is automatically considering to be the background. And notice it's got quite the harsh edge between the blur area and the sharply focused so-called foreground. And then we have chunks of other blur as well. Anyway, you might find it useful on a different image. I'm just going to crank it down to 0. Brightness is what brightness is, right? If you crank brightness up, you're going to brighten things, and you're going to keep your blacks. For some reason, if you reduce the brightness value, everything becomes totally murky. So I'd steer clear of that one. It's kind of an old school brightness control. Saturation is saturation. It controls the saturation, pure and simple, of all of the colors to the same extent. So if you want gray values, then crank it down to its minimum, which happens to be -50 for what that's worth. And remember, you can click on a value in order to highlight it, and then I'll just change that to 0. All right, preserve color. What that's going to do is preserve the original Hulk colors and just apply the luminance levels from the stylized effect. Now let's check out another one of these artist styles. How about next door? Right next door is an image. It's actually House Along a Road by Paul Cézanne. Did you know that? And that comes to us from 1881. So only a few years before Anxiety. Now, it looks pretty ridiculous at this point, and it's going to continue to. I'm just going to go ahead and turn preserve color off. And what we get is a bunch of orange blobs. Notice how they're sharply defined, though, against this kind of concrete background that has a bunch of scrapes in it. I think it's really cool, actually. There's something I might do with this one day, but it doesn't bear any resemblance to that thumbnail. So please remember, where artist styles are concerned, you're going to get the effect you get. If you want something that resembles a thumbnail, you want to switch to image styles, as we will in just a moment. But this helps demonstrate detail. Watch the orange blobs. I'm going to crank detail down to 0, and these blobs get a lot less distinct. And now we're seeing the scraping show through. So the scrapings, those details become more prominent. So it's not necessarily less detail. It just depends on which details we're talking about. All right. I'm going to switch over to image styles so that we can check out toward the end of the list. If you see any clouds, by the way, that just means you need to click on them in order to download the image. Here's the Scream. You may be familiar with that one. Also from Edvard Munch, I believe he pronounced his name. Never met the guy, of course. And in the fullness of time, I see that I have a bunch of horizontal brushstrokes, I guess, some of which are orange and some of which are kind of a greenish gray. And I guess that's more or less in keeping with that thumbnail there. So you may expect that to occur. I'm going to scroll up the list to something that's a little more successful. I have no idea what this is. However, I'm just going to go ahead and click on it to apply it. Now, another thing to note about image styles, they take longer to apply than artist styles, and that's because there are no instructions as with artist styles. Instead, Photoshop is just reading the image itself in order to make decisions on the fly. But eventually we end up getting these kind of glass shards, which do resemble the thumbnail. That's the good news. And, by the way, I could go ahead and crank that detail value up to its max of 100% in order to see even more glass shards. And notice how context sensitive things are. And when I say that, I mean sensitive to the context of the luminance information inside the image. So where we have high frequency details, as around the eyes, down here around the teeth and so forth, we have a lot of tiny purple shards. And where we have low frequency details, as in the skin, we have these, well, what are they? Diagonal yellow shards, bigger shards as well, going in the opposite direction. All right. This is also going to help you understand detail. Detail is a very useful value. That's why I'm kind of harping on it here. I'm going to select this thumbnail that looks like something out of the Matrix, and it ends up applying a bunch of 1s and 0s. Now, I've got the strength set pretty high, too high really to even see that there is a Hulk in the background. So I'll take it down to its default value of 20 so that we're following the contours that much more closely. We're still not making out a lot of Hulk here, but it's a little more than before. And I'm going to reduce the detail value. And notice we don't have any less detail per se. In other words, we don't have less resolution necessarily. We have bigger 1s and 0s of all different sizes. Notice that. Here's another one that I want you to see. The thumbnail doesn't look like much. It looks like the Rosetta Stone or something like that. It's actually a bunch of arrows and other dingbats set against a black background. But what it does is it creates this fairly intricate tracing that's unlike any of the other tracing functions in Photoshop. And now, in order to create more lines, I'll crank up the detail value back up to 100%, and no room for subtlety here. And you can see that we get a lot of little lines all over the place, and the high frequency details get a lot of tracing. The low frequency details just get a bunch of random looking lines, really. All right, let's settle on one. I'll go ahead and scroll up the list and click on Tattoo right here, which produces an interesting effect. And notice this time we're introducing some red, which is pretty cool because he is so very, very angry. And then we have all kinds of brush strokes going in different directions. Once again, in the high frequency details and in the low frequency. And so we really have kind of medium frequency right here, and then we have very low frequency outside the Hulk. So very cool effect indeed for the Hulk in particular. I do want to see a little more of his green skin, so I'm going to take the style opacity, just really opacity, you can think of it as, down to 80 right there. All right, before you click OK, stop yourself with your other hand and change output from new layer, which is great. It is kind of non-destructive in that it's going to, relegate your effect to a different layer. However, it is going to be a static effect, whereas Smart Filter is going to result in a dynamic effect that you can change anytime you like, as I'm about to show you. So I'll go ahead and click OK, at which point we will see the Hulk. Notice that. All right. So let's say you're looking at it and you change your mind, or what have you. You don't have to change your mind. You just want to try something new. Why then? You have a smart filter, a smart object as well. So notice the smart object is indicated in the layers panel by this thumbnail with a little page in its bottom right corner. The page indicates that you have an image that's safe and sound embedded inside the smart object. So the original image is not harmed. And then we've got a smart filter assigned to it, totally editable. Change it anytime you like by double clicking on smart filters, and that's going to bring you back into the neural filters, at which point you will see your settings once again. So those same settings I applied just a moment ago, 20, 80, 100, are preserved. All right. Here I am changing my mind. I'm going to scroll down. Oops, not in the artist styles. I'm going to return to image styles right here. And notice tattoo is still selected. And I'll go ahead and scroll down the list until I come to this guy that looks like cracked lava. I'll go ahead and click on that one to apply it. And while Photoshop is processing this filter or this specific effect, notice that we still have the same values. All right, I want to change the values, of course. So the first thing I'm going to do is increase the strength value to 50, let's say. I don't know why I'm saying let's say when I'm actually doing it. Then I'll crank up the style opacity to 100 and I'll take the detail value down to 0. Not because I want less detail, but because I want bigger, crackier lava, as we're seeing right here. So cool. Output will still be set to Smart Filter, at which point you click OK in order to accept that effect. All right, I'm going to press Control-0, Command-0 on the Mac in order to center my zoom. And here's the deal. Let's say I want to blend this effect with the original image. I have all the options in the world thanks to the fact I'm working with a smart filter. So notice this double slider bar icon over here on the right side of the layers panel. Go ahead and double click it, won't you? But a moment or two later, you should see your blending options. And all I'm going to do, make sure the preview checkbox is turned on, and then set the mode. In my case, you can choose from any number of modes here, but I'm going to set it to overlay like so we get this wonderful contrasty interaction, at which point I'll click OK to accept that effect. And that is how you take the wax version of the Hulk and turn him into a very angry Hulk indeed, using the style transfer filter, which is one of the neural filters inside Photoshop. All right, so if you are going to load custom images into the style transfer filter, it's a good idea. It's not essential, but it's a good idea to have those images open in advance, as I do. So I've got a few classic paintings here, including this guy from 1630 by George de la Tour. And it's great because this woman's going to tell this guy his fortune somehow using this coin. But meanwhile, he's getting fleeced over here, and this woman's got her hand ready for the contents of his pocket. And then this woman's my favorite because she's cutting the gold chain while she's keeping an eye on him to make sure he doesn't suspect anything. So there's that. Then we have from 1662, Young Woman with a Water Pitcher by Jan Vermeer. And we've got the actual Anxiety, the digital copy of the painting itself from 1894 by Edvard Munch. So we can apply them all to the Hulk, who's currently set in lava. All right, so I'm going to go to the layers panel and double click on neural filters in order to bring up the neural filters workspace. Now you are going to have to wait a moment for Photoshop to basically re-render the scene. So just do it. Just let Photoshop do its thing. Don't try to erase it. But once it has occurred, once you can see the lava, then you want to switch over to custom up here. And if you don't have an image open, then you can just click on this folder to load one or more images from disk. But mine are open, so I'll just go ahead and choose them from this pop-up menu, starting with the fortune teller. Now, presumably, because these images are otherwise unknown to Photoshop, they're going to take longer to render. But once the rendering is done, you'll see a preview on screen here. Now, my detail setting is very low, so I'm just going to crank it up to 100, which is going to invoke another progress bar. But once it finishes, I want you to notice the difference between the treatment of the high frequency and low frequency details. So remember, high frequency is areas of rapid luminance transition. So around the eye, for example, we see these fluid sort of details going on here. I guess I'd call them kind of slabs. Same around the other eye, same around the teeth. But then when we get into the low frequency details, which include the skin, we have all kinds of modeling that Photoshop is making up on the fly. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with this image, but we're definitely seeing there must be some kind of contribution going on. Let's put it that way. All right, let's switch to a more mellow image. I'll go ahead and choose Young Woman, that is, which is the young woman with a water pitcher by Jan Vermeer once again. And this time we're going to see much more muted colors. All right, so what I'm going to do is take that strength value down to its default, which is 20, and let that render again. And then I want you to notice another item here. Underneath the preview of the image, it says drag to crop the image. And so I'm going to crop away a few details. This way, I'm telling Photoshop just to focus on that cropped region. All right, so the result is awfully bright, and so you might figure the solution is this brightness slider. Unfortunately, it's like the old brightness contrast, the bad old one, that either just blows everything out if you increase the brightness value, or makes everything dim like there's some kind of horrible film on it. So the thing to do with brightness is to leave it set to 0 and otherwise ignore it. You can, however, use saturation if you like. This is straight ahead saturation, by the way. And so if I crank that up, I might end up with some better looking colors. All right, I don't want to use that in general though. So I'll return saturation to 0. And let's go ahead and scroll back up the list so we can switch to a different image, anxiety.jpg. Recall that is the painting by Edvard Munch. And it ends up producing a totally different effect than were we to switch to presets and then select that Edvard Munch thumbnail right there. In which case, well, we don't end up with lava. Photoshop's just showing me lava because that was the last thing I applied from the presets. We end up with this. I think this is sufficiently different that you know that we're looking at two very different effects. And in this case, I believe the big difference is that there's a lot more information built into these artist styles than there are into just plain old everyday images. In any event, I'm going to switch back to custom, and that should automatically re-invoke anxiety, the dread anxiety of this painting right here. All right, so got a lot of weird colors going on. Once again, Photoshop is treating the high frequency details very differently than the low frequency details. So the eyes and the teeth are getting preserved pretty much in terms of the details that are going on there, while the skin is getting all kinds of brushwork. All right, so, you can change things totally by cropping in on the girl's face if you like. And that's going to give us a very greenish, ghoulish result. All right, now, you don't have to go with the classic painting, by the way. You can go with an everyday average. Well, this isn't going to be everyday average. It's actually really cool, but it can be a photographic image. And so I'm going to switch to this guy right here, Purple Flame, which comes to us from the Dreamstime image library. You can see a preview of it right there inside that reference image area. And notice we get this crazy effect right here, which is a little hard to read, but what I'm going to do, that's the thing is that there's too much black inside this photo, and so I'm just going to crop in on the purple and orange details like so. And notice you do have the option of clearing the crop, so you could do that if you like. However, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing, and if you are too, then just go ahead and click OK. Output is still going to be set to Smart Filter, so click OK. Don't change that setting, of course. We want to stick with the Smart Filter. And then a moment later, we'll see the image rendered differently. And the reason it's rendered differently is because I had applied the Overlay Blend mode. If you don't want that anymore, click on that double slider icon over here on the right side of the Layers panel. Oh, did I say you have to click? You actually have to double click. If you only click once, you're going to wait an awfully long time. But in any event, I'm going to change the mode back to normal. You can play with other modes if you like, and then I'll go ahead and click OK. And that is how you apply your own custom images using, what is that thing called again? The Style Transfer Filter, which is a neural filter inside Photoshop. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe. Got a favorite artist style or image style or even a custom style of your own? Comment down below. If you're interested in more videos, including one on turning a photograph into a very realistic impression of Impressionism, then check out patreon.com/DeekNow and visit my very own Deek.com. I'm Deke McClellan. This is Photoshop Now.